Rehearsal is something we intuitively do. I suppose you learn it, you repeat that same thing again and again. You're less likely to go through, though, the whole testing process that examines all the connections and this right side image here as a student. You're going to have to be kind of forced and guided through that. And so that retrieval that comes through when you're being asked to go through that route there comes through retrieval, and rehearsal is more kind of just repeating something again and again. So retrieval helps to spot gaps, but it is more difficult. It leads us kind of thinking of Elizabeth and Robert Bjork about desirable difficulties, the need to desirable difficulties and build in retrieval practice, which makes us kind of think about when we should do that, when we should bring that difficulty into the learning process. So we're thinking about desirable difficulty, retrieval practice, space practice, and varied practice. When do we bring those into the learning process? When should we use retrieval practice? I think it's suggesting that once we've built some level of understanding, that really retrieval practice comes after this stage. Okay, that we build that level of understanding, and we can retrieve at the kind of knowing stage. It is possible to start retrieving information here and to try and retrieve this fact that we've got here. But that isn't enough to move to mastery. Retrieving that fact on its own in isolation isn't going to get you there. So it would become, I suppose, a lethal mutation of retrieval if we just made it into a pub quiz of these facts. So it comes after that, and it comes after this kind of understanding within this model, because it builds rigidity, I think, in the knowledge structures that students possess, and that's the role really of retrieval practice. And then our thinking of spacing as we go through this session today, we'll see how important that is to ensure that these links remain permanent and aren't broken, because they will weaken over time, some of these. And if we weaken one of these links, then our understanding gets stuck here, unable to really get to the real answer, which is done through that whole complex web of ideas. Now, to help us think about this a little bit more, we can add a sort of a working memory meter to this diagram. And when Efrat first talked about this, she suggested that at the kind of no stage, if we think about the impact on working memory, when we're learning our content for the first time and building understanding, the working memory, it can become fairly quickly overloaded, which is shown here. That kind of, we're really trying to build understanding, show them something, model something, they're reading something, and very quickly they can become overloaded. And clearly we have to think about reducing distractions and how we can use dual coding and diagrammatic representations of thinking to help reduce that working memory load, and to be really aware that that's a stage of a student's thinking where working memory is under pressure. Then as we move to the use stage of this model, as students know more, it allows for space in working memory, and as such we can get students to kind of use these strategies such as retrieval practice, okay, to help kind of, I suppose, fill up the working memory, and to kind of fill up this stage. And we use retrieval practice, they know these bits, okay, they're then using just a few spaces of their working memory, and they've got space left to do that retrieval practice. And then moving on to the mastery stage, more working memory is freed up. It's allowed to do more we can do more difficult work with freedom, with automation work. And so the idea is that desirable difficulties come later in that sequence after things have been learnt. So that's why we're doing our retrieval practice, our spacing, we're bringing those difficulties in towards the end part of this sequence of knowledge. Kind of a theoretical base there with that network model, it really helps me understand, certainly, kind of retrieval practice's position within the learning process. But I think it's always useful to pause and reflect on what's been said in these sessions. Think about the implications of this thinking about schema for retrieval practice in your classroom. Is there anything that's gone off in your mind whilst I've been talking about the kind of link between schema and retrieval practice? How retrieval practice goes beyond the pub quiz, but what are your reflections on that at the moment?